Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. So, the title of my talk is Made in Africa. And to begin with, I would like to ask you all, what do you think of when you hear that label? What kind of products or ideas do you associate with Made in Africa? Great. I think in the best of cases, yes, things like materials, fabrics, wooden masks, Maasai bead necklaces, maybe coffee, peanuts come to mind. And in the worst case, we think of child soldiers, pot-bellied children, AIDS, recently Ebola, dictators, and so forth. We also have a lot of very cliched and stereotypical images of Africa in our mind today, like these ones. I didn't specifically select these photos, or these pictures rather. They're actually the first ones that come up if you enter Africa into the Google picture search and take away the maps. So, so you might ask yourself now, with all these prevalent cliches, why am I speaking about Africa to you at an event that is about urban innovation? Well, it is because I believe that, in fact, what is so often referred to as the dark continent, in fact, has a bright future. And I'm here to take you on a little trip down to East Africa and tell you a different story about Africa today, a story about digital innovation in Africa. So at this point, you might ask yourself, why me? Why does the white girl from Berlin get to talk about Africa? And I actually think that's a really valid question, because whenever I get asked to do these talks, I always say, well, why don't you actually invite somebody from Africa to come and speak about their life there? But of course, that's not always possible. So whenever it's not, I do try to act as a kind of ambassador. But it was a bit of a journey for me to get there as well. When I first left university and started working in international relations, there were a bunch of people around me who had these romantic ideas about going to Africa and saving a continent, and none of that was for me. I was always interested in technology and the internet and innovation. I wanted to learn about mobile telephony and how things work in different countries and continents, so I went to Southeast Asia because I thought that's where it's at. And it wasn't actually until 2007, 2008, when something very specific happened and Africa put itself on the map. This is what happened. Can you give me a sign of hands? Who here has heard about Ushahidi? I hope lots of hands will. Surprisingly few hands are going up. Okay, well, in that case, I'd like to tell you about it. Kenya is considered one of the relatively stable countries with a halfway kind of functioning democracy and a relatively pluralistic media system. And the world was pretty much in shock when violence broke out after elections at the end of 2007, 2008. And in the midst of all the chaos and this panic that was happening, the then already very well-networked tech community and blogger community came together to say we have to do something to help our country in the situation that we're in, to create transparency and enable people to better understand what's happening here. So they created a really simple system, which was a mesh-up of Google Maps and an SMS tool called Frontline SMS, which enabled people to crowd map. So by writing SMS to a specific number to the system to label spaces and places and mark where violence was happening around Nairobi, but also around the country. And this was a huge success and actually really helped to create some stability and oversight in the situation. And because it was such a success, the people who created this tool then went and wrapped it all up as an open source tool in a way that people could download it and distribute it and use it in other instances. So Ushahidi is an innovation made in Africa that then spread across the world and was used, for instance, in Haiti to help rescue victims after the devastating earthquake, or was used after the nuclear devastation of Japan. And today there are hundreds of instances of Ushahidi being used across the world of fun things like, for instance, the Dutch use it to map spaces where you can go ice skating because it's cold enough and the water is frozen over in winter, which to the Kenyans who developed this tour is bizarre. Or places, people mapping their favorite burger joints across the US, but also mapping human rights abuses in Russia or abuses like female harassment cases in Egypt, for instance. So when I first heard about all of this, I thought, wow, this is so inspiring. I have to go and meet these people. I have to find out what this is all about and what's happening in Africa. But then, of course, I needed a place to come to, a physical place to start connecting people, because I didn't really know anyone back then. And luckily, the people who made this tool had the same idea. They thought we're tired of meeting up in coffee shops and not really having a home for our technology community in Kenya. So what they did was they founded an innovation hub, the iHub. Now, many of you will probably be familiar with the idea of an innovation hub. We have one in Berlin called the Better House. I'm sure you have something similar here in Hamburg as well. It's a space for people to come to and connect, kind of like an offline social network for people to meet each other, learn from each other, inspire each other. And this is particularly significant in many urban African contexts where there are young people coming out of university, maybe not the structures we have here to pick them up and bring them into business. So having a hub in a space like this is a first place to come and meet other people is important as such, but it's also important because many young entrepreneurs lack infrastructures like office space, but also just stable electricity and internet connectivity. And hubs like the iHub offer all of that. And the kind of open collaborative atmosphere I was lucky enough to experience myself is true. You walk in there, and within the first 5 minutes, you're in a chat with somebody like, oh, what's your startup? What are you working on? Wow, that's interesting. Tell me more. And you really have that air of just being able to approach everyone. And it was that open, collaborative spirit that really hit me where I thought, yes, this is a community that I want to be working with in future. Now, the iHub wasn't the first hub to be founded in Africa, but it was definitely became the leader on the block and was one of the most prominent ones due to successes like Ushahidi and other innovations that came out of this space. And as you see on this picture, I think one thing that these kind of hubs have in common across the world, whether they're in Europe or in Africa, is that every good hub needs two things, a coffee bar and a table football, and the iHub has both of those. So what started with a hub kind of became a movement. This is a map of Africa, and all the red dots are different kind of innovation hubs. These are specifically tech innovation hubs across the continent. And it's really spread. You see hubs popping up in all urban centers in Africa and diversifying as well. So you have tech hubs, you might have some art hubs, places that concentrate on photography and film, and others that really specify, for instance, on mobile development. So you can see this ecosystem growing by and by, and it's a very exciting thing to watch. A number of these tech innovation hubs are networked together in a network called AfriLabs, so that on a meta level, they can exchange their experiences, talk about what kind of business models work for hubs. And if you're interested in connecting with any of these spaces, if you need a contact point traveling to Africa to any city, then I recommend AfriLabs as one address to start with. Now you see the little island over on the side and the red dot on it, the island of Madagascar, a beautiful place, but also a very difficult place. And it is really because of people like this guy that I am so excited and inspired by the work that I do, and always want to share people's stories. This man, I think, has the most complicated name in the world. His name is Adrian Koto Harinyanka Ratotsamanana. And yes, that's true. And Madagascar is a country that doesn't have a functioning government, that is terribly corrupt, that is way behind the Millennium Development Goals. And yet there are people like Adrian Koto who won't take that as a baseline and a situation that he's just going to live with. He's one of those change makers who's trying to do the best he can as a blogger, as an activist, and as a hub founder to give young people the space that they need to create solutions that will improve the lives of theirs and their families and others around them. So here I met Harinyanka last year we knew each other before, but I met him here in a hackathon in Rwanda, where he brought a young team of developers working on solutions specifically for people working in agriculture, so farmers and people in rural areas, to an international hackathon in Rwanda, giving them exposure. We'll go back to that hackathon in Rwanda a bit later. It's also because of people like Martha. Meet Martha. Martha was 19 when she got a scholarship to go and study at the MIT in the US. This is 2 years ago. However, despite having this scholarship, Martha got refused entry to the US. She was denied her visa and wasn't allowed to go and take up the scholarship and study. So what did she do as a reaction? She founded the Nairobi Dev School, and today is teaching herself and other young people to code and to hack and to create solutions for local problems by themselves. So people like Harinyanka and Martha really create a space for innovation made in Africa. Now, you can't talk about innovation made in Africa without speaking of the killer application, M-Pesa. Can I get another show of hands who has heard about M-Pesa? Yay, a few more. Okay, very good. I'll make this quick. So M stands for money and Pesa stands for cash. And I was just speaking about local solutions for local problems. Well, M-Pesa definitely is one of those. M-Pesa is a mobile payment system that was launched in Kenya by the largest telecommunications provider, Safaricom, and was a huge game changer. Kenya is a country of the unbanked. It's true in many African countries, people hardly have access to financial services, access to bank accounts, etc., and thus don't have the ability to transfer money from A to B. M-Pesa changed all that. It's a really simple-to-use system where you can create an account. I did that within minutes the last time I arrived in Nairobi, and pay in cash, withdraw cash, do transactions from one mobile phone to the next. And previously in Kenya, there were only around 300 ATMs in the whole country. So you can imagine how hard it was even for the people who had bank accounts to access the cash. Today, there are over 40,000 of these M-Pesa agents in the whole of Kenya. And as I said, it's terribly easy to use. It's also really safe to use. I don't know if you know this, but Nairobi also has the nickname Nairobi. So it's not a good idea to carry lots of cash. And if you have an M-Pesa account, you don't have to carry any cash at all anymore. You can pay anything with it. You can buy cigarettes, you can buy mobile airtime, you can buy your beers in a bar, absolutely anything. So it's actually much safer to carry. If your phone gets stolen, it doesn't mean your money's gone either because your account is protected. Now, that's not where the story ends, because M-Pesa, like I said, was a huge game changer, but people have taken that as a base to innovate upon. So coming back to the point that people didn't really have access to digital payment services, which, by the way, also we're talking about urban innovation, but that in relation to rural areas also meant that people had to drive for hours and hours to go home just to bring a bit of money, a bit of cash home to their family. And today, that's done with a few clicks on your mobile phone. Also, people didn't really have the ability to pay for services online because they don't have access to credit cards or systems like PayPal, for instance. So today, there's PesaPal, where you can use credit cards, but you can also use M-Pesa to do digital transactions online. Or crowdfunding platforms like Mchanga that enable you to do fundraising based on M-Pesa. Now, this is a true cliche. For all the cliches that I'd like to get rid of concerning Africa, I've lived in Manila, Delhi, but it's really true. You haven't seen traffic unless you've been to Nairobi. Even if you only have to commute short distances from A to B, be prepared to stand for traffic for hours on end on any normal day. So, not only have people made it possible to pay any public transport with your mobile phone, and I'm not talking about tubes, no underground exists in Africa, or tramways or proper buses. I'm talking about your little like mini trucks and dingy little buses. You can pay all of this with your mobile phone, and there's free Wi-Fi. I don't know what it's like here in Hamburg. I don't even have a proper mobile reception half the time in the tube in Berlin. But in Africa, in Kenya, I can use free Wi-Fi on these little buses because they understood if you're going to have people stuck in traffic and it's going to take a bit of time till we solve that problem, why not give people free internet and have them be productive and creative in the meantime? So, and like I was saying earlier, you have the feeling like everybody you meet is an entrepreneur. There's such a huge boom, especially when it comes to mobile app development. You feel like everybody's kind of busy developing some kind of mobile app. Like this one, for instance. The guy who's holding this phone is actually a filmmaker, like does something completely different. But as a customer who takes a bus the whole time, it's his way, who commutes to the city with public transport too, he found it was really important to have a central sort of customer care place where you could report matatus, where the driver isn't behaving properly or overcharging. So he created this app, which is kind of a crowd customer care system for people taking public transport in Nairobi. And this is a really typical thing. Like I said, you find everybody's kind of an app builder and is busy in the software department. But it doesn't end there. What I find really exciting to see is the transition now, for the last couple of years, of all these great things happening in software and mobile app development to hardware. So what you see here is the brick. The brick is one of the newest innovations to come out of this iHub environment. It's a router that is specifically designed to meet African demands. So what does it do? It allows you to plug in several different devices. it's something that's really built to be robust and to be used in sort of the worst conditions. So you can use this on a sand dune or in a rainy, damp place. And it also caters for specific challenges. Like, for instance, the brick has a battery, like a power backup generator. So if electricity fails, which really happens very frequently all over the place, this will keep you going and will allow you to remain connected to the internet for a couple of hours, even if the electricity goes. So these kind of inventions, let's say, these kind of innovations are not just limited to Kenya. I've spoken a lot now about Kenya. I'm focused on the Kenyan example. But I'd like to point out that this is not just a Kenyan story. What you see behind me is a banknote from Rwanda. And already by what's printed on the banknote, you can see that other countries are also emphasizing the fact how important ICTs and digital innovation are for their future economies. Rwanda is one of these countries, and we're all familiar with the history of this place, but it doesn't have a lot of natural resources. And is really trying hard now to become, let's say, the Estonia of Africa by investing in ICTs, by wanting to give free internet access to the entire population within a couple of years' time, and also by supporting kids like these. This is back to the hackathon that I spoke about earlier. These are people who are networked with one of the hubs in Rwanda, the K-Lab, and developed an application, also a hardware application, based on Arduino, so an open source Platinum, that allows farmers to detect the nutrient level of their soil. So to find out whether their soil is too acidic, whether they need to add fertilizers, etc. And we're actually one of the winners of this hackathon that I spoke about earlier. So I think this is also a really important point, that these technological innovations are not just benefiting communities that are already exposed to technology. They're not just benefiting middle-class kids living in the high-tech urban centers, but also people outside from that. So applications like this Arduino device that I just spoke about, or platforms like M-Farm, for instance, which supply farmers with market information and use ways to actually transmit this, for instance, by sending SMS instead of using the internet or other, more smarter devices, perhaps, really relying on technologies that basically also today everybody in Africa has access to, like a simple mobile phone, for instance. So technological innovations are also reaching those kind of communities. And I'd like to have two other people speak to you now quickly. And the first one is Mark Kamau, who has made it his passion and his job to look at these kind of more marginalized communities and to see how can we specifically develop for them, how can we take their needs into account. Now, Mark is somebody who didn't touch a computer until he was 20. He grew up in a slum in Nairobi and never had the thought of doing anything with technology until, by a coincidence, more or less, he met somebody who had a computer and started working with it, and that became his passion.
I really would like for Made in Africa to start symbolizing passionately made things and high quality things and real things that actually solve and impact people's lives.
I would love for Made in Africa to be something that's it's been tested in Africa, so we know it'll work anywhere else.
The last person who you saw speak here is Eric Hirschman. He's one of the founders of Ushahidi and the iHub. And yes, if it will work in Africa, it might work anywhere else. I think these areas that I've spoken about today, mobile payment systems, but especially also the whole field of ICTs for agriculture, is something that we can definitely learn from here. It's a huge market in Africa because many people still work in these rural environments and rely on farming for food and income. But that's potentially also a huge market here. And there's, I think, way more exciting stuff going on that we can be inspired from and learn from. But you shouldn't just listen to me. There's plenty of opportunity to go and find out for yourself. I'd just like to pinpoint 3 different examples how, if you found any of this interesting, you can also go and connect and find out for yourself, be inspired. The Africa Hack Trip started by one person who just thought, wouldn't it be cool to, he heard about all these things too, to go and maybe build some tools together with people there. I'm a developer, I'm a hacker. Why not meet some of these people working on these things and see what we can do together? So this is a completely self-funded thing. He got a bunch of people together. They organized a trip, organized different bar camps and hackathons together with some of these hubs, and came up with a bunch of really amazing tools in the weeks that they spent working there. Similar to the Startup Bus Africa, which is an international project that brings in developers from all over the world together with developers from Africa. They go on a road trip together, and in that time build new startups and tools, pitch them at the end, and the best ones win and make that into a business. And Startup Bus Africa is planning 3 different tours this year, so in case any of you out there are interested in joining them, that's definitely one thing to look out for. Or if you're interested just in meeting some of these people, at Republica this year we're inviting the entire AfriLabs network, and if you want to shake Harianka, Adrian Koto Harianka Ratatsamanana's hand, or Martha's, then well, that would be a great place to meet them. So, if I want to leave you without one idea today, then it would be to stop helping and start investing in innovation made in Africa. Thank you very much.